You're listening to the Sketchnote Army Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook, and this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey, are you looking for the ideal sketchbook for your sketchnoting practice? The Sketchnote Idea Book is the sketchbook designed for sketchnoters. Equipped with no bleed, no show-through paper, you can take almost any marker or pen you can throw at it. Get 10% off with code ARMY at airship.store. Hey everyone, it's Mike Rohde and I'm here with Claire Ohlenschlager. Claire, it's so good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a very honor.
Well, I've been trying to get you on the show for a while and just timing and other things haven't worked out, but we finally have you and I'm excited. You're someone who's been involved in this community for a long time. And it's always good to hear perspectives of people who have been in the community for a while. And it might be interesting for us to chat a little bit about that in our discussion too and see like how does the community remain the same? And maybe how has the sketchnoting community changed a little bit? Obviously, we have new people coming in all the time. So that changes the community, which I think is great. But before we get into that, let's first start and let us know who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Claire Ohlenschlager. I live in the Netherlands, in The Hague, a very small country. And I work at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, where I work at the Teacher Training College, Languages Department. I've been a teacher, I think this is my 34th year. Secondary education, and now higher education.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I think it's the best job.
Yeah.
And it's hard work, but very rewarding.
I really admire teachers. The more that I teach, the more I admire teachers because I see how hard the work is. I enjoy it. It's really satisfying, but it's really hard work. And it's, when you get a really good teacher and you see it, I appreciate it. I know how hard it is to do it well. So thank you for doing all this great teaching for many years for many different people. I'm sure that people appreciate you for that.
I think it's a very, it keeps me young. I was just saying that to my colleague because you work with young people. It kind of keeps me young, I feel, but it's very nice to see people grow and to help them progress and help them when they're kind of stuck. And in pandemic and the years after, a lot of kids have been stuck. And so it's extra challenging, but it's very rewarding at moments. Very frustrating sometimes as well. But
I suspect, So I'm really curious so we know that you're here, you've been teaching for a long time. You've moved all the way through secondary to higher education, but how did you begin as a little girl, on your own, like you do sketchnoting and visualization, right? Probably in your work, but also personally. How did you get here? Like starting as a little girl, were you drawing all the time? Like what's the story and how did you end up where you are?
Well, I wasn't really drawing, but I was always writing. So I was always making sure that I wrote in nice letters. And of course, I'm from pre-computer, so we had to do all the writing. And I also remember that as long as I can remember, I would always want to write with fountain pens and not with ballpoint or felt tip pens or maybe sometimes pencils. And what I would also always like doing is add color to what I was doing so that what I wrote also looked nice. But not like like we sketch these days, but I did spend a lot of time making things nice to read again. And what I would also do a lot is doodle. So I'm not a very good drawer, but I am an avid doodler. So I lots of my notebooks, I still have a lot of them, have all these little doodles all around what I wrote. And from actually when I started, I couldn't stand messy pages, so that I would always spend a lot of time on making it. That's what people always say. How can you write things down straight away so neatly? But I think that's from when I was very young. I've always been like that. I've never been a drawer. I developed into a sketcher.
Interesting.
They're very simple.
Definitely an interesting perspective. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, how I came to sketching is I think somewhere around 2010 or so. I got every so often you have a 7-year itch, and I think I was having a 7-year itch, and then I decided to go back to uni to start studying again. So I went to do an educational master. And as it happened on one of the first evenings, I was after class, I was walking home and I passed our bookstore, and our bookstore had a workshop on mind mapping that was just about to start. So I figured I'd sit down, and it was a very practical workshop. So we got a large piece of paper and some pens, or actually I probably had pens. I always have pens in my bag, so I think I probably had the pens. And then he was telling us about how to mind map, and at the same time, I was mind mapping, and that was actually my first time taking notes of what I was hearing. And that worked so well for me that my whole master, everything I did in my master, I started off mind mapping. So I mind mapped everything I heard on my lectures, but also all the books and the articles I read. And gradually I found myself needing pictures and visuals. And then of course I started, because I was intrigued by the fact that it was helping me so much to, remember and to retain the information. And I was getting feedback, people telling me, oh, it looks so nice, and can I make a copy of it, etc. And so gradually I found myself needing pictures. So I started looking into it, and that's how I came across your book. And then I thought that was really interesting. So then I looked into that, and then gradually I turned my mind maps into sketchnotes. So actually quite often when I sketchnote, it has the order of a mind map that works from the top to the bottom, back up again. And I noticed that the mind map start of how I started this is, I can still find it in my notes. I use a lot of colors and a lot of arrows and what you would do in mind maps. I think it's probably originates from that. And when I did uni, that was also when I was introduced to social media, because I'd never even heard of social media. And so I had to make a Twitter account to have a personal learning network and, broaden that. So when I found your book, I started looking for you. And then, of course, I came across hashtags. And that way I got sucked into the community. Today's Doodle, I think Sketchnotes in Real Life, or Today's Doodle in Real Life. That's how I met Rob DiMeo, who started off and showed me you could make sketches in actual pictures. In the meantime, I'd bought an iPad, so I was kind of playing around with that, and that's where I met a lot of the Sketchnote community. And I was also intrigued by that, because around that time, a lot of people my age were saying, oh, what are you doing on social media? Social media is scary. Lots of ugly things happen on social media. And I was just getting inspiration after inspiration. And so that intrigued me as well. And then I started traveling. I like traveling. And then I started thinking, well, I'll just ask who in this community lives in whichever city I was going to. And then I found out that you could also meet up with sketchnoters that you met on internet in real life, and they were actually very nice. And that's right, where I sometimes try to tell my friends that if you chat with each other and you have a common ground, like sketchnotes in our case, then eventually you also know, you get to know people. You get to see their sense of humor. You see sense of humor in how people draw. Talking about something that you have in common also is binding. So meeting someone in real life then is as if you've known that person for a while.
Yeah.
And that's what I really love about our community. It actually feels like I have friends all over the world. And I've met some, I've met you, I've met people at the international sketchnote camps. I've met people outside of the camps, but in the cities they live in, or I've shown people around The Hague here in the Netherlands. And you always have something to talk about. And if you don't feel like talking, you always have something to sketch together.
Mm.
So that's actually, and that's how one thing grew to another, because at the same time I met Michaela, so Michaela Lewis in London, and somehow James Serretta in Australia, and we started talking to each other. And I started saying good morning and good evening, because of course there's such a huge time difference on my way into work. And that grew into me sketching, because what I always do on my way, on my commute, is I also found myself, when I have about a 40-minute commute to work by train, and there's a very small lapse, I think it's probably only about a minute, where we're kind of in internet, digital no man's land, and you don't have internet connection. I honestly think it's only about 10 seconds. But I found myself every time I got into that area and my phone would not connect, I'd get this kind of feeling, stress. And then I thought that's not really very healthy. So I started taking these little, I don't know whether you remember them when we were in Lisbon. I had these little use some note cards, the size of a business card. And I started taking them to school, and I started drawing on those. So that's how I got into drawing a doodle a day. And I always kind of tend to go overboard. I think I did that for about 5 years. So I switched from the Usum cards to a Hobonichi, because that paper is fantastic.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. And then, so I started sketching my morning, evening for Mackie and James. And I think I also did that for 3 years, every single day. And that turned into a huge box of things that I couldn't never throw away.
Yeah.
So that's when I switched to making them digitally, because at least then you can have a digital cupboard. And I did a couple of those with the community. So a couple of times I got to my 1,000 or my, I don't know how many. And then I thought, hey, how cool would it be if we could make one? I think we even made something for you once. I think we even drew you. That was also because I really love the way we can connect together. And I really love the idea that we can be all over the world and still be focused on doing the same thing, and then make one thing together. It's that's very, very interesting, and I think it's very motivating. I get a lot of energy from that. So I've done a couple of those kind of projects. Yeah, we drew you in little kind of pixel boxes. I remember that now. Yeah. And then we made a morning, evening together, and people from all over the world sending me. And of course, every time I did that, I regretted that I started it, because there's always more work than you anticipate when you start off. The idea is always fun. Yeah. But actually getting it to work is, but then that's a good thing of working at the uni. Full of people who understand digital things much better than I do. So I always have someone, a student or so, who can help me out with all those kind of things. Yeah. So, and what also happened is, because I think also those sketches, because I started drawing on those little Usum papers, I'd go to conferences or talks or whatever, and then I'd want to sketch, and I usually only had those papers, and so I'd have to sketch very small. And then obviously you can't use too many words, so you need the little icons. And then I'd give them afterwards. I'd take a picture for myself, and then I'd give the cards to whoever it was that was lecturing. Yeah, and that, and I also sent a lot of my Usum cards all over the world. I'd make a little happy birthday card, and then I'd tell people, give me your address and I'll send it to you. And then I'd get their email address, and I'd have to explain, no, I mean snail mail, and I'll send it to your home address. And not many people send you actual cards or anything written in an envelope with a stamp on it these days. So it brings me a lot of positive energy.
Mm. And I think the people that you share with get positive energy too.
Yeah, that's what I hope. Yeah, that's what I hope. And of course, you know, in uni, what I tried to explain, because all those mind maps I made during my master, eventually I laminated them all and I put them together with a binder, and they're always at the office. And then every so often when I see kids studying in my hallway, feeling slightly frustrated, I take out my binder and I show them and I tell them, you know, this is also a way for you to retain and to also make it fun, and drawing it makes you remember. You'll always remember, oh yeah, I think it's probably in pink on the right hand corner. And then you'll also remember because you thought of an icon. The icon will trigger your memory, and it really helps you remember. And yeah, quite a lot of my students try. Not all of them persist, but quite a lot of them try. And regularly I hear that it really helps them. So that's good.
Even if I would suspect if they still say type notes, but maybe they use drawings as a support mechanism, that could even be a win as well, right?
Now, when at the moment I don't teach that much anymore, but when I still did teach, I would actually tell them they had to have a notebook and they would have to take actual old school pen to paper notes.
How did they react to that? I don't really like it. How did they react to that?
Well, it needs in the beginning, you know, when you start as a teacher, of course, kids don't know you, but when you've been somewhere long enough, people already come in with their notebooks because they know.
Reputation.
And what also happens is it needs persistence. So I've also had, I remember one of my students a couple of years ago, and of course my students are already around 20 or so they're not they're still young, obviously. They're not really kids. And it took a lot of patience on my side and persistence. And then I think into the fourth week, he came to me and showed me with a very proud facial expression. He showed me the notebook he had bought and the pen he had bought. And that's what he used. And then what I hope is that if they catch the hang of it, then it really helps them. Yeah.
It does seem like, I was talking with somebody else about that too, that when you teach any kind of thing, like some people will incorporate it into their lives more than others. Some not at all, some quite a bit, and some people in between. So that's just sort of the normal thing, I suppose. But
I don't think it matters because everyone has their own way. And what you have to do is at least give yourself the chance to find out what your way is. And not find yourself stuck in the computer, because that's actually what they start off with.
Yeah.
But to give yourself the chance to try out what works for you.
Yeah, it's having an option, right? Presenting an option, and maybe that doesn't fit for everyone, but for some people it's perfect, right? So but it's up to. I was going to say, if you've never been exposed to it, you would know if if it works, right?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think it's up to you as the teacher to show the different ways that they can actually try to to study. So sometimes you tend to get stuck into your own way, into what works for you. But I think it's, as a teacher, you're obliged to show them different ways because you have different kids there.
Yep. An interesting side note that I hadn't planned on, but I'm curious about is, and I have a theory around it, is young people, at least that I encounter, seem to have a fascination with old analog things, record players. My son bought himself a turntable and he's buying records. I have a nephew who's really into Polaroid cameras. So being on a college campus, do you sense any of this sort of an attraction toward analog things? And my theory is that because our generation, we grew up with all analog, so digital was really interesting to us because it was a new thing. But I think about this generation, sort of steeped in digital stuff, that analog is now the fascinating thing, and so that becomes attractive for them. Can you speak to that at all?
I think I noticed that as well. And what I also notice at the moment here in the Netherlands, there's this movement that kids aren't allowed to take their mobile phones to school, or at least not use them.
Yep.
And what we're hearing back is the kids admitting that it gives them peace not to work with their mobile and not to have it in the vicinity, and that they're finally talking to their friends again, and actually also starting to pick up books. And I mean, it's still very early,
right?
But it's quite interesting to hear youngsters saying these things, because, you know, initially when they started, of course, they were all stressed out that they would be shut out of the world as they know it. And so it's actually very interesting to hear youngsters saying that. Yeah. No.
Interesting.
So yeah, it is interesting. Yeah. And what I do know is that in education, people are promoting taking notes again with pen and paper more so than they've been doing in the past decades, I think. So I think that's a good sign, because research shows that that's the best way to remember and to learn and to study. So, but what you know, I'm a language teacher. COVID time, of course, everything was digital because we were teaching through computers. And what happened was that when the kids came back, they couldn't write anymore. So they were having a lot of difficulty actually writing their essays because they didn't have the time. And of course, you are in a test, you have a set time, and they weren't used to writing and then having to correct and having to rewrite the whole thing again. Because, of course, obviously on the computer, you can copy, paste, or throw away or add. And so that was also very interesting, how quickly you also forget.
Yeah.
You need the practice. So one of the tips I would give is practice, practice, practice. It's not about doing it right straight away. And it's copy, but make sure to develop your own style.
Interesting.
And yeah, so I have my stick figure, and my stick figure is my stick figure. I think people recognize that it's mine, but it's a stick figure. So it's not really anything very special, except my own style is in it for you to recognize it. And that's why I sometimes think, you know, you have all these companies that do sketchnotes, and what you see is a lot of the same thing. So here, you know, you have a lot of stick figure for visual note taking, and it's very difficult to see the style of the person who wrote it, because it's set in standards of how you draw the stick figures, the coloring, etc. And I think, in my opinion, the best thing is to develop your own style, because the moment it's your own, it's more authentic and more real.
Yeah, it's part of you, right? It's an extension.
It's part of you. Yeah, it's like you whatever you do, your pizza or your Packers or whatever you do, you recognize your style. Mauro is the same. Prof. Clayton is the same. You know instantly which of you drew the sketch that you're looking at.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's like handwriting, but then in sketches. Yeah,
it's extended.
Yeah.
So you mentioned doing morning and evening. It sounds like you're not doing that now, or maybe you are, but digitally. Is there a project that you're working on right now that you would like to share and talk about?
No. Well, I noticed the little drawings I do, they help me relax. So what I notice at the moment is I'm doing a lot of these Zentangle things, because I'm extremely busy at my work, and it really helps me unwind at the end of the day. It helps me focus on something completely different, and it really relaxes me before I go to sleep, so that I don't go to sleep with all these hectic work-related thoughts on my mind. So I'm busy. I've got another project going with all kinds of different Zentangles, so it's something completely different. And I think the interest is, when I contemplate on what I do is I'm not a specialist in anything. I tend to do lots of different things. I always like projects, and I try to look at different things to do. So I'm an extremely creative person in a huge variety of creativity.
Interesting.
I do a lot of picking up, if Mackie would say rubbish. Picking up rubbish from the ground, and then I make something. I make a little figurine from that. And in COVID time, what kept me going was going on walks. So I'd pretend to go to work at the beginning of the day, and pretend to go home at the end of the day, and then I'd take pictures, and that developed into all these pictures, and then I make collages of whatever it is I see. So, so sketch wise, I think at the moment it's the Zentangles that I'm doing.
Okay.
And I, you have Inktober, so I like to do something for a whole month, the same kind of thing. And then, it gives you a nice collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to, I know a little bit about Zentangle. I think it's fascinating, and we'll put a link in the show notes for anyone who's never heard of it before to go look at it. It's really cool. It's really cool.
Yeah. It's very meditative. Yeah.
There's some crossover between sketchnoting. It is a visual practice, but it's very personal, I think. And the way to kind of get thoughts out of your head, as you talked about.
Yeah. And the personal thing is somehow in everything I do, all kinds of art things, I always need words. So I always think of words. And I like incorporating words or a sentence into whatever it is I'm doing. And this morning I was thinking I'm going to try a Zentangle that incorporates a word into it or something, because I think that's probably also my personal thing, because otherwise Zentangles they can look alike.
Right.
And then so I'm looking at how can I make my own Zentangle signature or something like that.
Yeah, something of a crossover.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one of my memories doing something creative with you, is you mentioned Lisbon, is when I reached out to you and said, "Hey, let's do a workshop on lettering."
Yeah.
And that was so
cool.
Much fun, right? We got a little projector, and we each kind of presented our different ways of doing things, and encouraging people to say, like, this is Mike does it this way and Claire does it this way. They're just inspirations for you to do it your way, right? These are some starting
points. And we did them on the use
on those little cards. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be small, and it can be yours. And we did coffee. We did the cards with the word coffee and told people to make their own cards around coffee.
Right. We'll have to make sure and we'll have to link to those cards too for someone to find them. So, And
you mentioned the international camp, and of course the international camp is also great, the way that came into existence, and how people meet there as well. Yeah.
We do have, if you're listening and you're curious about it, we have interviews, I think, with every organizer of the event on past seasons. But basically, it was 4 women in Germany who decided they wanted to make something happen, and that's the way the community is. Someone just decides we're going to do it. Kind of like Claire and I decided, hey, let's do a thing on lettering. Like, no one gave us permission. We just decided, right? So I think that community mindset is all through, and anybody that comes into the community feels that. And I think that's really empowering to feel like,
and that's also
do it.
It reminds me of in COVID time we did the Sketchnote on location museum visits.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was also so cool. And sometimes, I mean, I don't want COVID, I don't want a pandemic ever again. But some things that happened in the pandemic were very cool.
Yeah, it showed that you can be creative. Yeah.
It started with, I remember here we had the first signs of COVID happening in Italy.
Right.
And I thought of Mauro and Mario, and I felt sorry for them. So I sent a couple of the community members a message saying, shall we send Mauro and Mario a positive message every morning. Mm-hmm. And I gathered all these messages, not knowing that we were actually going to be in the same situation as they were, because I just thought it would stay isolated in poor old Italy and not reach us. But then, of course, it did. But and that's also, people are, you can send out a question like that, and people actually want to participate, and then they also participate. Like, you know, if you have a lot of people, some people had to wait for 20 days.
Yeah.
And then they actually wait, and on their day they post something.
They're excited. Yeah.
No, I really like that. I really like that. And it also brings me to, at the moment, with everything that's going on Twitter, I feel like our community is quieter.
Yeah, I think so. It's sort of spreading out a little bit. You know, we have a Slack channel for Sketchnote Army, which you can, of course, check out. I know there's other people that are creating private chat areas, and I think probably individuals are probably chatting with each other. So, I think there is, maybe that could be an encouragement for this year, is find some way, some public place. I think it's maybe moved to Instagram to some degree, but you know, it's more visual there. It's not, it's different.
It's not about the conversations.
Right.
Yeah. So on Twitter, you could wake up in the morning and you had 89 messages or something like that. And in Instagram, you don't have, maybe you have, I'm on Slack, but
it's different.
You also have that on, it's different somehow, but and maybe it's also digital fatigue after the pandemic. That's also quite possible. That people need detoxing from the digital world.
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics involved, probably, I suspect.
Yeah.
You know, talking about the International Sketchnote Camp, it's happening in 2024 in Texas. The details aren't available yet because Prof. Clayton, who's organizing, is still working out details. But he's a professor of a university in Texas in San Antonio. So it would be centered around San Antonio, and you know, an opportunity for maybe some Europeans to make it to the States. And see that, and have some great barbecue, of course, and tacos, and the things that are unique to San Antonio and Texas. So as we get more information, we'll of course post that. But that's, if you haven't been to one of those, especially if you're in the US, this would be a great opportunity for you to come to it.
I think, I think especially if you're in the US, because they've all been here in Europe. So I can imagine that people in the US, it's a lot of money, of course, that you have to spend. If it's in the US, it's closer to home, but it's such a nice experience. It reminded me of, you know, when I was at school as a kid, you would go on weeks with your class. And you'd have fun,
school trips,
doing silly things and laughing your heads off, and having, you know, jaw pain and stomach aches because you laughed so much.
You don't want it to end, at the end of the
sing together and dance together. And when you get older, maybe sometimes you feel like you can't behave that way anymore, but it's...
we do.
I remember when we were here in Leiden, and we, at the last day, we danced and sang, and and it's so much fun. It's so much fun. I mean, I always think never grow up. And sometimes it's good to have that feeling and to just laugh out loud.
Places where you can be yourself.
Laugh out loud to silly things that you can't describe to people who weren't there. It's very difficult to describe to people who weren't there. So I would tell my colleagues at and you know, people who haven't been there and who don't know that, I think they don't understand why it's so much fun, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
It's hard work for whoever organizes it.
But it's, you know, it's for the community, so there's satisfaction in delivering it to the community. That's what I've noticed in all the organizers. When they're done, they feel tired, but it's like a good tired. When you do something of meaning and you're tired for a good reason, like that's the kind of feel that they often have. So.
And definitely, I mean, how cool is it to see people enjoying themselves over something that you organized?
Super satisfying.
Yep.
So we'll have more information on the Sketchnote Army page when that's
Good.
officially announced, which I think should
Good.
be relatively soon. I won't speak for Prof, but maybe by the time this recording comes out, it'll already be announced. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
This episode of the Sketchnote Army Podcast is brought to you by Concepts, a perfect tool for sketchnoting, available on iOS, Windows, and Android. Concepts' vector-based drawing feature gives you the power to adjust your drawings anytime you like. You can nudge the curve of a line, swap out one brush for another, or change the stroke thickness and color at any stage of your drawing, saving hours and hours of rework. Vectors provide clean, crisp, high-resolution output for your sketch notes at any size you need, large or small. Never worry about fuzzy sketch notes again. Concepts is a powerful, flexible tool that's ideal for sketchnoting. Search Concepts in your favorite app store to give it a try. So you mentioned these little cards, and that reminds me to talk to you about your favorite tools. And you mentioned too that you do digital. But let's first talk about analog tools, since we're old school and we love our analog tools. What are your favorite pens? You talked about these cards. Are there notebooks that you like? Any other stuff that you use that you can share with us that maybe might inspire someone to try something new?
Yeah, I'd say Hobonichi is number one. Hobonichi paper is perfect. I always like the small sizes, so the A6, the Teco. These days I use Talent. It's a Dutch brand, which is very nice paper, but not so much if you're writing with a fountain pen, which I like.
Right.
And then fountain pen wise, I like Twisby. Twisby has a very nice pen point, and I really like extra fine. I don't really like the medium or the. I always like writing an extra fine, and then the extra finest is a Sailor fountain pen. So fountain pen, and then I use I think it's now I can't remember but anyway, the watertight ink in a converter in my fountain pen. I don't remember the make anymore. Diplomat ink. Okay. And then for using fine liners, recently I've been using Artline. I picked up an Artline, I think I'm not sure, at a Sketchnote camp sometime, maybe even in Portugal, so I don't remember. And they're very nice. I used to use Unipin. I think it was called Unipin.
Yep, I've used those.
Yeah. Actually, I'm using Artline a lot, and they're very watertight. They're actually really black.
Nice.
And some of the pens, if you press too hard, the tip kind of disappears into the pen. Yeah. That doesn't happen with those. And then I like using colored pencils. And then I have to think what. Caran d'Ache.
Okay, French, yeah.
And then the watercolor pencils, because you can
put some
watercolor pencils are really good colors. If you press hard, they're actually very dark. I don't know how you say that.
Yeah, intense. Yeah.
Intense colors. Yeah.
And then I think you can use water to spread them too.
You can use water. Yeah. And so those are the things I use most. And then the use some cards. The sad thing is the guy who made the use some cards and sold them, etc. He passed away last year. So they're looking for someone to take over his business. So it's down for the moment, but I'd still share because they're working on it being, someone else doing it. So it'll probably be up again. Yeah. I like using small, and so like what I'm doing now is I have these little I don't know whether you see them on a little gift
like a price tag. Yeah, or price tag or something.
And then a little gift tag, and then I tie them together, and then I put that in my coat pocket, and then sometimes I just take them out, and then I always have a pen in my coat pocket and a little packet of those, and then I just sketch or Zentangle or write a word that I want to remember or whatever. And on my holidays, what I've been doing is these little wooden pegs. And then I sketch the name of wherever it is I'm visiting, and I put those in all my pictures. So,
nice.
That's how, yeah. And then digital. So I have an iPad Pro. I tried working with Remarkable for my notes at work, but it didn't work. I need paper. I need to feel paper. I need to feel the flow of my fountain pen on the paper, and I need to be able to color in with red or whatever in my lettering. And Remarkable doesn't do colors, so Remarkable was a bit boring. And iPad is too smooth to do that. I tried the sticker thing on top, but also
still wasn't enough.
The paper still wasn't enough.
Yeah.
I'm really I like writing on paper, but when I do my sketches, so I do a lot of sketching for all kinds of educational things here in the Netherlands, and I do those on my iPad. And when I'm sketching as a sketch note, I usually use Adobe. I think it's called Fresco.
Yes.
I used to use Draw, but it changed. I'm still kind of getting used to Fresco because things work a bit differently.
Yeah.
And when I'm doing a more kind of artistic look to it, then I use Procreate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because of the brushes they have available, of course.
Yeah, but they have different kinds of brushes and blurring, and somehow they have so many possibilities that I think Fresco is a bit harder. It looks like writing on paper more than Procreate. It can also look that way, but it also does a lot of as if you're using a brush or whatever.
Yeah. It is interesting
the more
how each
artistic way.
tool has a feel to it, right? You know.
Yeah.
Procreate does feel like it's made for making art.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to do a lot on my phone, just with my finger, and I used to draw on my phone. But since I have my iPad, I usually have my iPad in my bag also. I have a far too heavy bag. I'm always carrying around everything. And then I have, Diana's little pencil case.
Yeah.
And it always starts off relatively flat and empty, and then within a week it's far too full.
Yeah, we'll have
and then my bag gets heavier and heavier, and I have to empty and sort it all again.
Reset. Yeah.
And then I'm sure you recognize I have far too many pens, but I'm still always able to find a pen that I really need and I can't do without, and then I just have to get it. So when we were I was in Jordan a couple of weeks ago, and we arrived on December 31st at 11 p.m. And right across the street of our hotel was a little pen shop.
Oh, nice.
Which was open on December 31st at 11:30 at night. So I had a stroll around that, and of course had to buy 2 little pens, which I really needed.
Of course.
Probably not, but still.
You can rationalize anything, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we'll have to make sure and put links into the show notes, especially Diana's pencil case, the stand-up pencil case.
Yeah.
So we'll find that link as well.
Is really good.
Yeah.
So
now let's shift into the tips section. So this is where I frame it as, imagine someone's listening or watching. They are a visual thinker of some kind. Maybe they feel like they've reached a plateau, or they just need a little bump of inspiration. What would you tell that person in 3 tips?
Well, I think I'd start off with practice. And because with practice, you develop your own way of visual thinking, because it's about paper layout. When you start, you want to have an idea of how you're going to place things on paper, which also I think brings me to that white spaces don't matter. So when I started, I would put everything together, and it would kind of intertwine, because sometimes you want to add a picture or word, or you want to tie it together with a border or with a color or whatever. So I think another tip would also be, don't be afraid of white spaces, because in the end, what you do is you finish it off, and you'll notice that those white spaces won't matter. You also need a bit of peace and quiet in your sketch.
Yeah.
If it's too full, it's too much.
Yeah.
And if you're able to work in quiet spots in your sketch, I think it's also good to have a bit of peace and quiet on your paper or in your notes. And I think with all the talking about tools, etc., it's not really about the tools, because, like I was saying about my students, I think you have to try, and then you try different tools, and then you work out that you prefer the 0.1 over the 0.8 pen, or the other way around, and whether you prefer the Caran d'Ache over Stabilo pencils or whatever. And it's not really about the tool. So don't go around buying whole sets. Start off with one. You know, usually you can also buy one color of a certain pen or a certain pencil. First, try it out before you invest in lots of tools that you're not really going to use. And that's why I also think of buying a whole box of pencils or a whole box of pens, felt tip pens or whatever colors. There's a lot of colors you're never going to use.
Right.
Yeah. So it might feel like it's more expensive to buy the single pencil, but in the end, if you're only going to be using 3 of the colors of a whole box in these days, you also have to think about not wasting too much. Yeah.
Cool. Those are great.
So that would be, I don't know, did I say think in pictures? I'm not sure whether I said that already.
That can be number 4, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I noticed, I do drawings for educational meetings, and then they'll have a theme. And then what I always find myself saying is, if they have a theme for one of their evenings, they have a title. The title is usually very general. So I find myself always asking them, what kind of words do you think of when you're within your theme? And those words will help you find the icons and the pictures, and metaphors will help sometimes as well. And that reminds me that what a good link would also be is the noun project.
Yeah.
Yeah. The noun project is where if you have a word, you can type it in, and it gives you all kinds of digital drawings that people have made, little icons. And not that you use them, but they are good for inspiration for what you can use in your drawing yourself or in your sketch. So I use that a lot as well with the noun project. Yeah.
That's great. Those are great tips. So we have 4 good tips and solid ones that you can apply right away. Thank you.
Good.
So tell us, Claire, what's the best way to reach you? Website, social media, if someone would like to follow your work and reach out and say hi.
Yeah, I think I'm most active on Instagram. So that would be #Claire_OHL. My name is Ohlenschlager. That's far too long. And that's where I post a lot, or if not everything. And of course, I don't post my the notes I take at work anymore.
Right.
And in my profile, I have the link to, I think I called it a WordPress called Claire's Creativities. I haven't updated those, but if you look in that, then you see what I just described, that I'm very diverse. I'm not a specialist, so I do lots of things. And then you'll see all kinds of things I do that aren't necessarily sketchnoting, but still recognizably me. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well. So if you want to see her work or reach out and say hi, you can certainly do so.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll let you know. I'll let you know the names. Just I'll send them to you just to be sure. The names of my pen and my
for sure.
Notes. Yeah,
we'll get that to make sure we put those in the show notes. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Claire, thanks for being on the show. More importantly, thank you for being part of our community. Thanks for being a leader, for being so welcoming and caring and connecting. You're another part of this community that's connected us together. So thank you for your contributions. I really appreciate you and the work you've done, because you've made a lot of people's lives better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. very kind words. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And thank you for being my inspiration, because that's what you are. And I'm sure you are to many other people in our community.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
Well, for anyone who's watching or listening, it's another episode of the Sketchnote Army Podcast. Until the next episode, we'll talk to you soon. The Sketchnote Army Podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohdesign Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of AMP Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon or go to peachpit.com and use the code ROHDE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends, and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.